because his time is short, and we don't want to take too much time, we want to bring him up. So give it up, everybody, for Howard Finkelstein.
Although the topic that we are discussing is one that should have been put to bed decades and decades and decades ago. The fact that it still lingers, the fact that it still stings, the fact that it still takes away is something that for people my age who lived through the civil rights movement, who was here in the 60s, is still a shocking thing. I want to kind of direct you just right here to where we live, to our community, to our county. But I think it's important that you know that what you are talking about happens every single day in our community. Yeah, you didn't know I was the public defender. Well, being your public defender, and I've been doing this for almost 40 years now, there are still two standards of justice, two systems of justice. Before, for a whole bunch of reasons, what has traditionally been the belief that the laws apply to everybody equally is just not something that has ever happened yet in this country. I think that what Hope has done here is really important. These issues are huge and they're deep. Right here in Broward County, for decades, I have been screaming, as Hope talks about the fact that if you're black and you're driving down a street in Broward County, the chance of you being stopped is so much greater than if you are white. The problem is everybody who was black knew that. Everybody who's been a public defender knew that, but we couldn't prove it. Well, something happened here in Broward County. I decided to take a chance. And when I got elected, I got rid of all of my investigators that were political appointees. And I hired retired cops. And I said, you know where the bodies are buried. You know where the data is. I want it. And over the last 5 years, we have been able to show with empirical data that, and I'll start with walking. If you are black, you might be surprised to find out that we have in many cities a law that says it's illegal to not walk on a sidewalk. Now, I've been a lawyer for almost 40 years. I didn't know that. I'd never heard of it. When we looked, we realized that every single person in Broward County that got a citation for not walking on a sidewalk, 96% of them were black.
Wow.
That's not possible unless it's a target. Well, the target was, and these were mostly kids walking home from junior high and high school. And this would never be allowed in my neighborhood because I would go batshit crazy if some cop grabbed my 15-year-old kid, threw him on the ground, and searched their backpack. So I unleashed my investigators, and we went out, and we found that all of these citations were in certain neighborhoods in Pompano and in the northwest section of Broward, right around near Dillard High School. And then we looked a little closer, and we found out, and you're not going to believe this, there were no sidewalks. The city had never, ever appropriated money to build any sidewalks in poor black neighborhoods, so poor black kids walking back from school were being stopped, searched, and in some cases given a citation, and if something was found in their backpack, they were charged with a crime for not walking on a sidewalk that didn't exist. So I said, okay, if this is happening to kids, there's more. We then realized, because we had a couple of kids, young people, that were charged with possession of drugs, and that happened because they were riding their bike. Okay, so I just explained to you about walking while black. Well, now we have biking while black.
Wow.
In the city of Fort Lauderdale, you have to register your bicycle. Now, as you can imagine, black people and white people use bicycles at about the same percentage, and they're mostly young people. Well, what was happening was if you rode a bike and you didn't have a registration affixed to your bike, you were being stopped, you were being searched, you were being beaten up, you were being arrested.
So we got a hold of all the data, and what we found out was in Broward County, of all of the people that were issued citations for biking for biking without being registered, 94% were African American.
Oh, come on.
Better than that, not one citation was issued east of US 1. Not one. So now I figured, okay, now can I get to the heart? And that's driving. Well, that was always a tough one because remember, the cops will always claim that the reason you were stopped is your tail light was out, and if it really isn't out, they'll make it out. That we knew that people who were of color were being stopped when people who were white weren't, but we couldn't prove it. When they passed that new seatbelt law, I had an idea. I said, this is a good way to look. Because if you're driving down the street and you're not wearing a seatbelt, does anybody think that black people don't wear seatbelts more than white people? Really? I mean, really. So what we found was that 70% of every citation for not wearing a seatbelt was issued to black people. So the bottom line in Fort Lauderdale is, if you're black, you'd better not walk, you'd better not bike, and you'd better not drive, or you're going to be stopped. That, and although it sounds funny when I say it, when you really look at what happens, it's not funny at all.
No, it's not.
Because what happens then, and this is why it has, you're going to hear from speakers about economic disparity. One of the main reasons for young black people not having a fair shot is they can't get out of the neighborhood without a rap sheet. Why? Not because they're doing anything different than white kids. Here's the difference. My kids are now 27 and 25, and when they were a little bit younger, they were like every other kid that age. They were drinking their tequila, smoking their marijuana, walking around with their bongs. The difference was no cop would ever break my door down, knock my wife on her ass, run into my kids' room, and search for their drawers. That happens every hour of every night in certain neighborhoods. Now, what does all this mean? Well, it plays out even more, and that's why this program is so important, so you can see a global view. You would think that we could go to court, and once we put this out there, we're going to get relief because everybody can see that this is wrong. Well, we have 100 judges in Broward County. 6 are black. 6. You may not know this, or you might know it. We live in a majority-minority community, which means when you add up all of the minority groups, they constitute more than 50% of our community. Yet only 6 judges are black. So they come into that courtroom with a predisposition not to hear and not to see. Not because their hearts are bad, but as the speaker in the video said, because their mind ain't right. And the way the prejudice plays, and that's why ending racism is not only an imperative for people of color, but it's going to free white people as well. Because they are inextricably intertwined. But as it plays out in court, and I've watched this for the last 10 years, when I started 40 years ago, they used the N-word in court. They used it in court. I heard judge after judge say, how can this be murder? You just killed a black guy. Right here in the most liberal county in America. That's what was going on. Well, today's racism is different. Today's racism isn't one of a dark heart. It's one of a messed up mind. And here's how it works. When I have a client and he might be 18 years of age and he might be a white kid. Well, he walks into that courtroom and he's kind of dressed like the judge's kid, kind of walks like the judge's kid, kind of has the same tone and intonation. And what the judge feels on a visceral level is, hey, he's kind of like my kid. I'm going to give him a break. You know, he messed up. Now my client, the next client, young black kid, kind of walks in. Maybe his pants are riding a little low. Maybe he's got a little pimp roll going on. His tone, his attitude is a little different, culturally different. The judge who's white,
who has nobody of color in their life looks down and doesn't say that's a bad black person. What they feel is, this kid's attitude's not right. I'm not going to give him a chance. And that's the difference. It's that simple. And when you confront the judge with that, they can't see it, they can't feel it, because in their mind, they're the judge and they know this kid's got a bad attitude. And what they don't get is that in different cultures, there are different ways, and there are different mannerisms, and there's different ways in which people walk and talk and shake hands and express themselves. And as long as our community stays separated, we live separately, we worship separately, this is going to continue to be a problem. I still am amazed when I walk into school sometimes and I walk into a cafeteria and I see segregation. Still, to this day, it's amazing to me. I understand where it comes from. What I don't understand is why everybody wants to hold on to it. It's a cancer. And in many ways, racism is like peeing on yourself. You might get a warm feeling at first, but then you're just